echoing off into the distance behind you. BMW Seattle has the perfect BMW for you. Right now, lease a new 2017 X3 xDrive 28i for only $549 a month. Selection, comfort, convenience. All reasons BMW Seattle is the ultimate BMW center. BMW Seattle, just south of downtown near the stadiums, or online at bmwseattle.com.
Okay, ready? Here's a story.
Gotta run?
We're having a weird night in
Don't
the
miss a
news.
thing.
First
Listen to
of all,
MSNBC on Sirius XM 118.
Donald Trump's soft stance on white supremacists may have pushed Russia off the front pages this week, but Russiagate was still in the news. Putin-loving Republican Congressman Dana Rohrabacher has confirmed he met Wednesday with Julian Assange, the founder of WikiLeaks, the organization U.S. intelligence has identified as Russia's distribution channel for emails stolen from the Democratic National Committee. The congressman said that he wants to share with Donald Trump the details of his chat with Assange, including Assange's denial that the Russians were behind the DNC email hacks. Except now, the FBI may not have to take Assange's or Rohrabacher's word for it, because according to the New York Times, a hacker who U.S. intelligence has identified as the creator of a program that was used in the Russian hacking during the election turned himself in earlier this year and has now become an FBI witness. Joining me now, MSNBC contributor Malcolm Nance and MSNBC intelligence analyst Naveed Jamali. Thank you all for being here. Naveed, I'm going to start with you on this. This hacker, he is identified, I believe, as a Ukrainian malware expert who is said to be able to potentially blow the whistle on Russian hacking. What's the import of having him turn witness?
Well, so the biggest problem that the Russian investigation has faced is that the sort of drawing these direct links back to the Kremlin. So we've had this cast of characters from the Donald Jr. meeting where they might be Russian nationals, but it's hard to definitively say if they were in fact Russian officials. Having someone who's working, who's turned themselves into the FBI, is cooperating with the investigation, who may be able to solidify those lines back to Russia, while for most of us, we are sort of at the point of saying, of course Russia was involved. It's important to establish physically an evidentiary that Russia was in fact directly involved in this. And if he can actually connect those dots directly, regardless of the hacking involvement, but connect the dots directly to Russia, that is a huge step. And more importantly, if he can connect that back to somehow to the Trump or to Trump himself, that is even a larger issue.
And Malcolm Nance, where does WikiLeaks play into all of this? Because obviously they deny that they got the information from Russia in the first place. Could this hacker potentially prove that they are lying?
Yes, he could. And that's because WikiLeaks turned out to be the Russian cutout for this activity. That's an intelligence term of art for a middleman who takes on your information and passes it on and gives it an air of legitimacy. And that's what WikiLeaks did. They flooded the zone with all this information, which came from Russia. But let me touch on this hacker for a minute. What he has is he has the electronic genetic code, so to speak, of the malware suite that Russian intelligence stole from him and used to create the advanced persistent threat software that was used to hack the DNC. So he can give the FBI, as a working witness, the actual fingerprint of his malware and show how it was modified by Russia for the use of the DNC. So there were lots of other characteristics about these malwares that were used, like the fact that they used Cyrillic keyboards and were linked back to a Russian intelligence server. But this is going to be a treasure trove of information.
And Naveed, one of the other interesting aspects of this whole Rohrabacher weird meeting with Assange is who set it up. It was set up by a blogger named Charles Johnson. Charles Johnson is somebody who is known to those on the internet as an internet troll, as somebody who is a Holocaust denier, and an alt-right blogger. He reportedly set the meeting up. This is him standing and smiling with Dana Rohrabacher outside of that embassy, the Ecuadorian embassy in London, where he set up the meeting. Rohrabacher's team, I believe, has confirmed the meeting was set up by this blogger. And there he is giving what a lot of people believe is the white power sign, which sort of looks like the OK sign. Very strange. What do you make of that connection?
Well, it's exactly to sort of what Malcolm is saying is, Russian fingerprints, they're all over this. And it seems to me that the Russians have this large network of these sort of undesirables that they've been able to tap into, and somehow these people are acting. I mean, look, they're acting as frankly as Malcolm said, as cutouts. And it seems to me that why a congressman would go meet with Assange, why Assange wanted to meet with a congressman, what he has to tell Trump, the whole thing just reeks of oddity and Russian, just frankly, Russian fingerprints. So I don't understand exactly what's going on with this. I don't understand, how the Russians got into this group, but certainly they seem to be using this whole movement to support Trump and to somehow be involved in this.
So using sort of obscure bloggers. We're going to talk about another one of them in the next hour, Malcolm. One of Rohrabacher's political opponents in California now wants the FBI to investigate him for that meeting. He's been accused in the past of potentially violating U.S. sanctions in the Magnitsky Act when he tried to get the deputy general prosecutor in Russia removed from U.S. sanctions last year. He's a guy who's long been known to have an affinity, claims he lost an arm wrestling match to Putin back in the 90s. He has a very weird set of affinities. What do you make of this confluence between him and an alt-right blogger that he uses as the go-between to set up the Assange meeting?
Well, to be honest, I really believe, and I've spoken about this extensively, that right now the Senate Intelligence Committee, the FBI, and the House Intelligence Committee have made it clear that they are investigating Americans who were in cooperation, communication, and quite possibly co-opted by Russian intelligence, which makes them sort of a fifth column. And we've found that that fifth column is ultimately made up of alt-righters who view that Trump's policy towards Russia and Russia's policy towards the United States furthers their goals in their, neo-Nazi white supremacy world. The Russians are actually hosting an alt-right white supremacist conference in Hungary in the next month featuring Richard Spencer. I don't know if Dana Rohrabacher is all of that. I've met him. I see he's a very sincere person. He actually believes these relationships with the United States and Russia should be improved. He's an old Vietnam veteran. You've got to give him props for his service. But he himself may have invisible fingerprints and strings that are working around him with guys like, Johnson and some of the others in the alt-right that are being used for Russia's own political purposes to damage or destroy American democracy.
And really quickly before we go, Naveed, just walk us through how Russian intelligence would use sort of what could have been an obscure blogger who most Americans have never heard of. How would these guys, there's the guy in Florida who says he could get Hillary Clinton's emails, there's this guy, Charles Johnson, how would Russian intelligence interact with them and use them?
Well, that's a very good question. And very quickly, what I'm seeing here, as someone who worked against the Russians, is I get the sense, Joy, that the Russians were, in fact, very scared of being identified, that they actually, whatever they intended to do in the 2016 election, I think the second part of them gaming out this moment right here, they wanted to make sure that there was plausible deniability. So with that, I think that the cast of characters that you're seeing that the Russians may have had connections to is not the traditional folks we have here. Now, look, we can go back to what ISIS did with eBay in terms of getting money to these people, buying products. There's all sorts of creative ways that they could have gotten to these people, funding them on GoFundMe or Patreon. Bloggers who use YouTube views. I mean, there's all sorts of ways to get money and to get messages to them. So I think what we're looking at is this sort of non-traditional way of getting this sort of fringe element to frankly support them directly and honestly on the social media platforms. That seems to have been a huge part of this, and it is, it is frankly shocking.
Yeah, if you saw an obscure right-wing, potentially even on the racist right blogger, suddenly pop in supporters, in followers, and jump up in YouTube views, and if they were suddenly getting a lot of money in their Patreon accounts and they don't have a, verifiable source of income, you might want to look into it a little bit.
That seems like...
Huh?
That seems like a good place for the Senate and the Congress to look into, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. Naveed Jamali, thank you very much. Malcolm will join us again in our next hour. And up next, Trump's affection for losers.
News doesn't just break.
We've seen the president lawyer up.
Intense questions on the wake of this investigation.
Splinters in different directions.
North Korea is now issuing new threats.
Takes unexpected twists and turns.
White House senior staffers playing defense on yet another Russia story.
And our trusted NBC News journalists will guide you through it.
Police now have been moving through this street.